No country is more tied to Hezbollah than Iran, and all eyes are on Tehran tonight. Hezbollah was founded in the early 1980s by Iranian Revolutionary Guard members to combat Israeli forces in Lebanon. It serves as a Lebanese offshoot of the Islamic Republic, sharing similar anti-Western and anti-Israeli rhetoric. Nathaniel Dove reports.
Sirens, likely warning of revenge. Hours after Israel killed Hezbollah's leader, the Houthis, another Iranian proxy, fired a missile at Tel Aviv that was intercepted. Hassan Nasrallah's death prompted a chorus of mourning from Iran's allies.
In the eyes of many people, he represented the sort of the epitome of resisting Israel's occupation.
The chorus's conductor, Iran's supreme leader, vowed revenge. Before, Reuters sources say, moving to a secure location. Israel's Friday strike on Beirut also killed a high-ranking general in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, Iran's main provocateur. Iran has directly assaulted Israel before, in April, after Israel killed Hamas's leader who was in Tehran. But experts say Israel's previous attacks show how far its intelligence can reach, pushing Iran to use proxies.
Basically activating all of the different militias that they support across the region, be it in Iraq, Yemen with the Houthis.
With all sides escalating, experts tell Global News the rules that enemies use to avoid war have changed.
Those red lines were crossed ages ago. Establishing new red lines, new deterrent capabilities on both sides really is going to be the big challenge.
Analysts believe counterattacks are coming, but may be limited. Korma says Iran and Hezbollah's somewhat narrow responses, launching just one missile after losing many leaders, could show how restrained they'll be.
Those are all indications that Iran does not want to go to a wider war, and neither did Hezbollah. And I think that may give us still a very narrow window for diplomacy to continue.
But only Tehran and Tel Aviv know for sure what's to come. Nathaniel Dove, Global News, Toronto.
Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me today. Looks like a good day to talk about Iran, doesn't it? What kind of power plants do they have there? Who is more dangerous, the United States or Iran? What are the differences about these power plants, all these nuclear places? You want to know about heavy water versus light water in some of the terms? Bill Gates is getting ready to open up a new facility. They're kind of recycling old terms, but let's get on board with what's going on. You know, for years and years, I used to wonder why Iran is surrounded by U.S. military bases. Well, I think I have the answer. I think it's because of the drug trade. No one goes in or out without being seen, right? Unmarked planes on the ground. Oh, wouldn't take a genius to figure out from those U.S. military bases they could fly, well, let's say unmarked planes into Iran to facilitate the drug trade. But let me not get ahead of myself here. Everyone seems to be afraid. Don't rattle Iran or they will instantly nuke us to death. Or another way to look at it is this theory being spread to keep prying eyes out of Iran. Make it so dangerous that who would ever question what's going on in Iran? Yes, they have nuclear bombs. They're going to get us any second. Well, while that may sound kind of frightening, let's see how much of it is true. And I've been looking at this drug trade. They just changed. Let me see here. There was a drug trade that I talked about in the last couple of shows, and that was called the hash route. Now, that hash route was going into Netherlands, of course. Good morning. And, of course, their friends, Brussels. And that hash route is now the cocaine route. They took it from hash to cocaine, and the cocaine. So now Netherlands/Brussels is the point for all of the drugs going into Europe. So then I was wondering, well, so what drugs are entering the cocaine into the Netherlands? Well, looks to me like it's all coming out of Iran. A lot of things kind of suspicious, but make sense now. Why did the U.S. leave over $7 billion of military gear behind in Afghanistan? They left 78 aircrafts, 12,000 Humvees, and thousands of air-to-ground weapons after Biden's chaotic leaving there in 2021 withdrawal. And that's just according to their own Pentagon report, right? They left a lot of stuff on the ground. Why did they do that? They did not say they were stopping the drug trade when they pulled out of Afghanistan because no one admitted it was a drug trade versus really a war. So go listen to my show about the Afghan drug trade. So I guess we figured that they pulled out all the people, they left all the equipment behind, things would clean up, right? Well, they left behind a disastrous amount of poverty. So how does that poverty going to react? Well, by going back to doing what they have been doing at the bequest of the United States and growing more drugs. So it would be foolish to think they stopped the operation. It would be foolish to think the people running the operation were no longer hanging around there. So I have all the documentation. For example, this file will be kind of large, I'm guessing. I will take some breaks and try to put Iran into one file because we need to also look at they're threatening this nuclear stuff by saying Iran is so dangerous with nuclear. Well, that keeps all eyes off of Iran as far as the drugs, right? So anyhow, and I also, for this show, I pulled together things that I've just been saying offhandedly, like, oh, who founded the Taliban and all of that. And I also found original people and quotes for when these foundings of the Taliban and these things that are involved now got taken place. And I have the documentation because I'm not just guessing, okay? And I encourage you to cruise the links down below. If you want to go over to my website, all of those links are clickable, so you can go and explore for yourself. This is a massive, massive subject. And I'm sharing my work so we all get the complete picture, right? So if anyone asks you, well, why would you say the Taliban is actually run by the USA? Well, there you go. You can answer them if you have the complete picture too. So what I'm going to be doing today is, and there's lots of ways you can share information with others in solidarity. I found one woman, and what she's done with my show is she took my audio and she put like an intro to it, played some music, and then when I was doing the talking, she did the graphics to support it. She put together a show. There's lots of ways to show solidarity to my work. So anyway, what I'd like to do is at the opening here, let's talk about the ways that these things are, in fact, being run by the United States. Because that way, when I'm going through the show today, I won't have to, every time I mention the Taliban, say, oh, do you remember? That's really done by the U.S. So once we get the words straight. And then I will be going through the nuclear things because it appears to me the U.S. is much, much, much more dangerous than Iran is. I mean, we have a ton of nuclear facilities all around, and we're getting more and more, right? Well, so who actually is more dangerous? Let's look at the facts. So let's start with the Taliban. It was a terrorist organization that is associated mainly with the country of Afghanistan. The name Taliban is itself an Arabic word which means students. So let's look back at some of the history of the Afghan history. The Taliban was founded in 1979 after the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan, which set up a communist system inside the country. Many Afghans were unhappy with this and fought back against the Soviets. You start to notice the patterns here, right? They were known as the Mujahideens, another Arabic word which means along the lines of the defenders of the faith. As they were fighting the Russians, they naturally, and I'm reading from this piece, okay, they naturally became allies with the Americans who were in the grip of the Cold War. Now, naturally, right? See how it works? What has happened basically is Russia kind of starts some of these operations and, oh, gee whiz, the U.S. takes them over, hands them off to the U.S. is more like it. So Americans, so anyways, as they were fighting the Russians, they became naturally allies with the Americans who were in the grip of the Cold War. Almost could have written this script myself. Americans helped financially and armed the Mujahideen to fight against the Soviets. Very, very helpful of the Americans. Your tax dollars at work. As the years went on, well, this is the shocking part. The violence only worsened. Just colored me shocked. While the men fought against the Soviets, many of the women and children fled to neighboring Pakistan as refugees. Yes, when you talk about the war of divide and conquer, always get those men away from the families, right? And then we have this group, ISI. Kind of sounds suspiciously like ISIS or ISIL or something, but hey, I don't know. I'll just keep reading here. So then ISI, which is Inter-Services Intelligence, saw a way of using this situation to their advantage. In 1994, they started to train some of these boys in religious schools in combat tactics and radical forms of Islam. This is where the Taliban we know today originated. Now, I don't know if this ISI is the Inter-Services Intelligence, but, it seems a little suspect to me, but, I got a lot to cover today. But this ISI started, suspiciously around 1948 or so. So how the Taliban took over Afghanistan. With the help of USA, Mujahideen won the war against Russia. Boy, that was handy. So Russians pulled out their Soviet-backed president, Mohammad Najibullah, in 1992. And he was soon replaced by a Mujahideen government. There was no cooperation between the leaders of this government. Imagine that. Thus, a civil war started, which resulted in death of 50,000 Afghans. And this made me really wonder, because when the United States had that civil war, or so we call it, I believe that was the juncture in time when a lot of our families and people were not on board with the Pilgrims and their Satan deal. And that's why they called it the Civil War, because that was when a lot of us got wiped out. Also a time when a lot of people headed to those hills, also gave them the children to put on those orphan trains. So, yeah. So this seems like a different country, same deal, right? Cut and paste. So they get the USA gets the Russians out, and 1992 they replace. So there's no cooperation. Well, why is that? I don't know. I'm just guessing here, but I would guess that maybe there were people actually that didn't want the U.S. coming in and running their government, and probably these 50,000 Afghans that met their untimely death was because of this conflict. But hey, I'm just guessing here. So anyways, in 1994, the Taliban arose in southern Kandahar. This group was founded by Muhammad Omar and his students. Their mission was to establish Islamic law in Afghanistan. These Talibans were Afghan people, but they were like foreigners to Afghanistan. And this is what I found very weird. So why all of a sudden were these new Taliban people? They say they were Afghan people, but they were like foreigners to Afghanistan. They were speaking a different variety of the Pashto language, which they had picked up in Pakistan. The Taliban also claimed that they want to clear the country of territorial warlords and corruption. Yeah, isn't that always the goal? We're here to fix things. We're here to solve things. And then they turn around and do the exact same thing the last guy did, right? Funny how these things work. the best thing they brought was order and efficiency in the system. So within a month, up to 15,000 students joined the Taliban. They always need their workforces now, don't they? These students were from religious schools in Pakistan, and most of them were once Afghan refugees. The Mujahideen government became weak during the Civil War, and the Taliban gained power. So in September 1996, the Taliban took control over much of Afghanistan and captured the capital, Kabul, with very little resistance. So what do we have going on now? Now we know what's going on a little bit in Taliban land, right? Well, Pakistan, and I kind of put these into some sort of an order here. Hold on a second. Excuse me. So let's follow this Pakistan deal. So Pakistan is now becoming a transport hub for opium supply, with drug networks operating from the country and the supply reaching not only India and other South Asian countries, but also the rest of the world. So now we have this hub of drugs coming through Pakistan, likely all that poppy and stuff, right? According to the United Nations World Drug Report, Pakistan serves as a vital transit route for the smuggling of drugs. Listen to this, worth over US $30 billion. And I don't know what time frame that was, but I'll have all the links below. So I hope you go hunting for yourself. So then I found this piece, and it was talking about, it said Afghan and Pakistan cartels have survived empires. Now they are drowning Indian Ocean regions in drugs. Like their colonial era ancestors, smugglers are the economic backbone of impoverished communities in Afghanistan and Pakistan. Tons of narcotics stamped with Afghan cartel trademarks. It's called Pegasus, Pegasus. That's the winged horse. They also use the rampant eagle. The scorpion have been showing up in European ports like Folkestone, Antwerp, Rotterdam, ingeniously packed into legitimate container shipments. So now we have to figure out, how does Iran hook into this? But I'll keep reading here. Like their colonial era ancestors, or possibly when they took over the game board, right? Smugglers are the economic backbone of these impoverished communities. Last year, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime warned that despite a fitful Taliban ban, Afghan opium. Let me start over again. There's a method to my madness. The reason why I'm going to be doing this Iran thing at all one. I'm not going to be around forever. So what I'm trying to do is do this massive file to show you that, well, I don't think Iran's the enemy. But anyway, let me start over here. Last year, the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, they warned that despite a fitful Taliban ban, Afghan opium sowing had reached record levels. Ensconced in the political system and cocooned by Pakistan's intelligence services, the cartels responsible for bringing the harvest to ports in Balchistan and the wider world. So what's going on? The United States and, well, this is the irony, right? Because I believe it's being run by the United States. So let's talk about what is the U.S. public position on this. The United States and the European Union have considered Pakistan for its association with terrorist organizations and drug trafficking. You notice how it becomes a terrorist. Full disclosure, I am considered a terrorist here in the United States, but I don't have time to. I've done shows about the gang stalking and the terrorism. What they do is they declare that some of us are terrorists, so that way, like in my case, they can radiate my home with electricity, and they have my smart meter hooked up to high volumes of plutonium. So this terrorism thing is a pretty popular deal. So they're obviously, that's why they call everybody terrorists. And that started out of 9/11, this whole idea that the world is full of terrorists. But I'm here to try to explain to you, I think we've been looking at the wrong people and calling them the terrorists, right? Maybe, just maybe, the United States and the UK have a vested interest in convincing everybody that some of us are the terrorists and not actually them. So let me keep going here. So the United States and the European Union have considered Pakistan for its association with terrorist organizations and drug trafficking. Pakistan faces severe warning from the United States of America to revoke an allegiance with drugs and terrorism immediately. Stop that. Stop that, the U.S. is saying. Otherwise, Pakistan will no longer be able to enjoy the financial assistance provided by the USA. See, we're also funding all these drug organizations. So, okay, we fund drug organizations in other countries to ship drugs into this country to do the eugenics program that's going on. So this way, the government can make money off these drugs all along the way, right? So despite all these warnings, Pakistan is still not complying with the International Convention on Drug Trafficking. Gee, I wonder why that is. There is a need for a strategic approach to curb the nexus between terrorist organizations and narco traffickers in Pakistan. In 1989, when Soviet troops were withdrawn from Afghanistan, but Pakistan remained there and still acted as a hub for the supply of drugs. So the Soviet troops were pulling out of Afghanistan, 1989, right? When did we pull out? Just a couple years ago. Anyway, so when the Soviets pulled out, Pakistan remained there in Afghanistan and still acted as a hub for the supply of drugs. After the war, the Taliban took control of the opium producing areas and dominated Afghanistan. This article goes on to say it is nearly impossible to find anyone in Afghanistan who doesn't believe the United States is funding the Taliban. And it's the highly educated Afghan professionals, those employed by ISAF, USAID, international media organizations, and even advising U.S. diplomats who seem the most convinced that the U.S. is funding the Taliban. The U.S. has an interest in prolonging the conflict so as to stay in Afghanistan for the long term. It does not take a lot of research to prove the Taliban and Al-Qaeda were fabricated by the CIA in league with Pakistani and Saudi Arabian intelligence. So I found one quote. Brzezinski, his daughter is now over on, some morning show. Okay. In 1998, Zbigniew Brzezinski admitted the Taliban was created by the United States. What is most important to the history of the world? The Taliban or the collapse of the Soviet Union? They always have a reason, right? Some stirred up Muslims or the liberation of Central Europe and the end of the Cold War, said a testy Brzezinski when pushed by publication. The creation of the Taliban was actively encouraged by the ISI, and that's that first group, the ISI, the group that started in I think it was 1948. So obviously it's under the control of the CIA. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to figure this stuff out, right? So the creation of the Taliban was actively encouraged by the ISI and the CIA. The United States encouraged Saudi Arabia and Pakistan to support the Taliban. The CIA also used humanitarian front organizations such as the Committee for a Free Afghanistan to fund and train the Mujahideen and eventually the Taliban. The CIA also spent millions of dollars developing and printing textbooks filled with violent images and militant Islamic teachings for Afghan school children. We should recognize that American tax dollars helped to create the very Taliban government that now wants to destroy us, said Representative Ron Paul. I don't think it's funny that what they're doing. I think it's funny how they make these declarations. They just casually stand up and say, well, we're using American tax dollars to create the Taliban. Okay, so what's anybody going to do about it? Nothing. Okay, in the late 1970s, in the early 1980s, the CIA was very involved in the training and funding of various fundamental Islamic groups in Afghanistan, some of which later became today's brutal Taliban government. In fact, the U.S. government admits to giving the group at least $6 billion in military aid and weaponry, a staggering sum that would be even larger in today's dollars. So, well, it certainly sounds to me, but like I said, I encourage you to go read those links so it's as clear in your head as it is mine. Because years ago, I met this man online who was very, very helpful to me. And I won't say much about it, except that I have been looking into planes from the U.S. into Iran for a long time because the U.S., just look at a map, just type in U.S. military and a map of Iran. The whole country is surrounded by U.S. military places. So years ago, I was asking this very kind person who was helping me. He worked in that region for his entire career, so he knew the lay of the land. So in one of our talks, I asked him, I said, being as how the U.S. has bases totally surrounding Iran, I was wondering, were there a lot of unmarked planes in the region? Like, was it typical? And this person worked right in the Middle East, okay? Was it typical at these, places that you would see unmarked planes? And he said, yes, a lot of them. So it doesn't take a real genius to figure out you got these Air Force, these bases all around Iran. You need to go into Iran to do your drug business. You fly an unmarked plane. I mean, this is not really crazy stuff, right? So in a little bit here, I'm going to be talking about Russian spies because there's two words you need to know, polonium and plutonium. And we also need to know what kind of nuclear exactly does Iran have. I kind of talked in passing in the past. There's one kind of specific nuclear plant that can, in fact, produce plutonium. And I was also cruising some of these forums and I found this great site and I have information about how easily this could be made. Remember, they set up these power plants, these nuclear power plants, and the common thing to those is they're also like roped off from us, right? Confidential. I don't think you could probably walk up. No, I haven't tried because I can no longer walk. I don't think that I could go and explore the nuclear power plant here in Nebraska. It's called Cooper. And when I looked into it in the past, Cooper just, I didn't have all year to look at it because there were so many issues with it from leaks about the area and all that kind of stuff. So I suspect that it would be from reading just some, surface reports. It seemed to me like kind of a disaster and there's people there reporting on it. But it would seem to me that everybody should know where that area is near you, right? Because there's a lot of issues with these plants. So anyway, so looking into these plants, I discovered there's one particular kind you want to be more concerned with, and that particular kind is better at producing this plutonium. So let me get back on route here. So I read this report. Let me see here. I don't know if I'm gonna skip this or not. Well, I'm not going to get crazy into this war with Hezbollah and Iran right now and what the U.S. government's saying and all that stuff. There's certainly a million news references out there for you to take a look at. So while you're taking a look at those, keep this in mind. So basically, a Lebanese cleric and the Secretary General of Hezbollah, a Shia Islamist political party, and a militia. So this Hassan person is the leader of the Iran-backed terrorist group Hezbollah and was killed by the Israeli airstrike in Beirut on September 27th, 2024. And today is September 29th. So they say they got him with a bomb strike. Well, I don't know. I'm not going to go all weak worrying about that. I kind of doubt it. He's probably off with that other guy, Soleimani. What they do is they stage something to pull their people off of the circuit, right? Pull them, the kitchen's hot. Maybe they want to put it in new leaders. They buy this guy up. I mean, lots of things happen before this guy maybe actually ends up dead. Well, do they end up killing him at some point? Well, I certainly don't know about that, but probably a strong possibility. But for now, he could have just been pulled off the scene, right? So they announced that 3 official days of mourning starting on Monday. Public offices will be closed. So Hezbollah wields significant power in Lebanon, where it operates as both a Shiite Muslim political party and a militant group. It violently opposes Israel and Western powers that are operating in the Middle East, and it functions as a proxy of Iran, its largest benefactor. But how about if it's really this? So they're saying that Hezbollah violently opposes Israel and Western powers, right? Well, if the United States is Hezbollah, this stuff starts to make a whole lot of sense. Stops making sense, right? Because what they're essentially doing, obviously, at least obvious to me, is they're playing both sides of the fence, right? Because I talked just real briefly before about how the Obama administration, this is what started this whole idea for today, because this whole idea of Iran and this nuclear thing, I believe it was for 2 reasons. Because if everybody is scared of what Iran is doing with nuclear, then who's going to notice if they're running drugs? It's the biggest drug running operation in the world right now. Who's going to notice that getting set up, right? And then it all falls under secrecy. And nobody's taking a deep dive into exactly what is this threat. I mean, what are those nuclear places they have? And that's what we're going to do today, because I mentioned before that Obama actually stopped a deal. And here's what it was. The Obama administration blew up an investigation into drug trafficking by the Hezbollah into the United States for fear of displeasing Iran. See, isn't that convenient? In which President Obama was seeking to strike a nuclear deal, according to a bombshell new report by Politico. Obama went to great lengths to appease Iran, or Iran, Shiran, whatever. So, and don't forget, they had a Yunk in charge of Iran when all this stuff got started. So I digress. So they had a Yunk in charge when they took over the Middle East. That was who was in charge of Iran. When they organized your borders, they changed your languages, they gave you new flags. That's why the Middle East flags all look the same. So Obama went to great lengths to appease Iran, including letting the 2009 Green Revolution against the mullahs fail, all in order to secure an agreement that merely delays Iran from completing its nuclear weapon programs by a few years. In its determination to secure a nuclear deal with Iran, the Obama administration derailed an ambitious law enforcement campaign targeting drug trafficking by the Iranian-backed terrorist group Hezbollah, even as it was funneling cocaine into the United States. The campaign, dubbed Project Cassandra, was launched in 2008 after the Drug Enforcement Administration amassed evidence that Hezbollah had transformed itself from a Middle East-focused military and political organization into an international crime syndicate that some investigators believe was collecting $1 billion a year from drugs and weapon trafficking, money laundering, and other criminal activities. So somebody starts to investigate, right? Project Cassandra is what it's called, and you can find a million twists and turns with this deal. So anyway, 2008, it was run by the DEA and about Hezbollah. And they were kind of surprised to find that, well, they're doing all the drugs, right? Well, surprise, surprise. Over the next 8 years, see, I think some of these things get exposed because there's so many government offices, right? One group may really be looking at something, and what they find is their criminal friends in another group are actually the ones cooking it up. That's what I think this is, but let me keep reading here. Over the next 8 years, agents worked out of a top-secret DEA facility in Chantilly, Virginia. They used wiretaps, undercover operations, and informants to map Hezbollah's illicit networks with the help of 30 U.S. and foreign security agencies. A lot of effort, right? Or this could be part of their satanic thing is that confession phase, right? And usually they bury the confession in such chaos that it's hard to figure out. So it could also be that. So they followed cocaine shipments from Latin America to West Africa and on to Europe and the Middle East. This is the whole shipment we're on that once was, I believe, the hash route. Okay. Now remember, I've never done international drug smuggling. I'm just trying to figure out exactly how this has all been working. So this group, the Cassandra group, they follow these secret cocaine shipments. They track the river of dirty cash as it was laundered by, among other tactics, buying American used cars and shipping them to Africa. Now, who would have seen that one coming, right? So they had the drug cartel from Latin America to West Africa and on to Europe and the Middle East, and others through Venezuela and Mexico to the United States. So that looks to me like the whole route that's going now, except when they mention Europe here, they don't mention the intersection of Brussels and the Netherlands, right? Excuse me, because in order to get into Europe, it goes through the Netherlands, let's face it, right? So buying used cars, that's a pretty clever one. So they tracked the river of dirty cash as it was laundered, buying American used cars and shipping them to Africa. And with the help of some key cooperating witnesses, the agents traced the conspiracy they believed to the innermost circle of Hezbollah and its state sponsors in Iran. Wow, whoops. But as Project Cassandra reached higher into the hierarchy of the conspiracy, Obama administration officials threw an increasingly insurmountable series of roadblocks in its way. According to interviews with dozens of participants, who in many cases spoke for the first time about events shrouded in secrecy, and a review of the government documents and court records. When Project Cassandra leaders sought approval for some significant investigations, prosecutions, arrests, and financial sanctions, officials at the Justice and Treasury Departments delayed, hindered, or rejected their requests. The Justice Department declined requests by Project Cassandra and other authorities to file criminal charges against major players such as Hezbollah's high-profile envoy to Iran, a Lebanese bank that allegedly laundered billions in alleged drug profits, and a central player in a U.S.-based cell of the Iranian paramilitary Quds Force. Wow, something else, right? And the State Department rejected requests to lure high-value targets to countries where they could be arrested. The money allegedly laundered through the Lebanese Canadian bank and 2 exchange houses involved approximately 30 U.S. car buyers. They lost me on that deal, but I don't really know, but it means something evil. So they said that the money allegedly laundered through the Lebanese Canadian bank and 2 exchange houses involved approximately 30 U.S. car buyers. So I guess what they're saying, they probably have 30 people on the ground there posing as car buyers, right? Who are bringing in and laundering this stuff. That makes sense. Went on to say, this was a policy decision. It was a systematic decision. So, veteran U.S. illicit finance expert sent to the Pentagon to Project Cassandra to attack the alleged Hezbollah criminal enterprise who escaped. Let me see, who am I talking about? There's this person. Oh, David Asher, okay. David Asher is a veteran U.S. illicit finance expert who was sent from the Pentagon to Project Cassandra to attack the alleged Hezbollah criminal enterprise, who helped establish and oversee Project Cassandra as a Defense Department illicit finance analyst. They sincerely ripped apart this entire effort that was very well supported and resourced. It was done from the top down. So yeah, we got a pretty good direct quote there, right? Obama did it. So, let me see here. So I don't know that we need to worry about this. The U.S. unilateral sanctions and economic war against the Iranian nation is impeding the country's international cooperation. Yeah, okay. Well, somebody made remarks at some conference in Tehran talking about the International Day Against Drug Trafficking and Abuse of Illicit Drugs. He said that the U.S. and some other Western countries, I wonder who that is, maybe like the UK, are responsible for the consequences of hampering the fight against drug trafficking. As confirmed by the United Nations, Iran is today the flag bearer of the fight against drug trafficking, Zarif said, adding martyrdom of more than 8,800 policemen and over 12,000 others being left disabled are the heavy costs Iran paid for. Because of its geographical situation on neighborhoods of the world's biggest producer of traditional drugs, Iran's anti-narcotic measures are not merely restricted to its borders and have rather regional and international effects, the foreign minister said. And this is something else. It is for sure the pipeline, okay, because it's coming in from Pakistan and Afghanistan. So Iran accounts for 80% of the opium being seized in the world. putting the amount of opium seized by the Iranian forces 800 tons last year alone. He criticized certain governments for opposing the goal of a world free of narcotic drugs. Ignoring the measures taken by supporters of free drug trafficking by raising the human rights issues, Iran works to promote public health by monitoring the quarters, the minister said. And here this thousand thing comes up. It says the question arises, what does exactly this 1,000-year communication route mean? Why has this road been designated as vital for Iran? Got those 1,000 lights, got this 1,000, right? And it said, first, there is a need to take a look at the statistics. Because today, Iran continues to function as a hub on the route, which is considered as a main artery of global drug trafficking in the world. Iran, I realize I'm pronouncing it differently. I've never taken an effort to pronounce the name of psychopaths properly. Iran is considered the main crossing point for this line, the main artery of global drug trafficking. Now, isn't that convenient that they tied up Iran and acted like they're going to blow our brains out any day, right? Just to hide this stuff, right? Well, this is how it appears to me. So, let me see. I got to read this again. Because today, Iran continues to function as a hub on the route, which is considered the main artery of global drug trafficking in the world. Iran is considered the main crossing point for this line, which runs from Afghanistan to Southeast Asia, and sometimes it is called the Baltic route. Now, I don't know how the hash route figures into this, but I think I could have the hash route, maybe the hash route that I was looking at, maybe it's a Baltic, I don't know. But anyway, we're looking at what the route is, right? So, this is the result of analysis carried out by various international organizations. This is also confirmed by the official statistic published by the relevant authorities of Iran. According to the UN Office on Drugs and Crime's most recent annual report, approximately 35 to 40% of all opiates produced in Afghanistan are transported through Iran and shipped to various parts of the world. Sure makes it handy to have all those U.S. military bases circling around borders, right? Makes it very, very handy. In addition, another report prepared by the mentioned institution stressed that about 40% of drugs seized by the Iranian state authorities remain inside the country. As a result, Iranian drug addicts and the SEPAH group provide the regime with income and domestic political stability. Thus, studies conducted by international organizations as well as official statistics published by Iran show that the country plays a significant role in global drug transit. Well, color me convinced. In addition to the traditional drug, Iran is also a major distribution center for the synthetic drug methamphetamine, which has been in use for the last decade and is spreading rapidly around the world due to its low cost. In 2019, Iranian authorities stated that the majority of the country's methamphetamine market had been seized by Afghan smugglers and is being used as a transit to reach other markets from Iranian territory. So I'm not really sure. So Iranian authorities stated that the majority of the country's methamphetamine market has been seized by Afghan smugglers. As a result, Iran is considered an important supply hub for methamphetamine to foreign markets. This synthetic drug, the use of which has spread rapidly in Azerbaijan in recent years, was brought into the country by Iranian drug traffickers. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime 2021 report on the situation I just went through and picked up some things that they're up to. You might want to explore them further yourself, but the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime 2021 report on the situation in Afghanistan highlighted that heroin plantations and methamphetamine production facilities in the country are mostly located along or close to the border of Iran. Well, that makes perfect sense. Same reason why they have all those planes close to the border, right? Let me see. Let me give me a second here. Yeah, close to the borders of Iran. And there they got the planes, right? Additionally, in May 2021, the Afghan government announced that the Taliban, or /USA, had significantly increased the country's capacity to produce methamphetamine, adding that the production process was taking place in regions bordering Iran. The main reason for this, of course, is the reduction of logistics costs in terms of market principles. Thus, having a safe corridor under the direct control of Iran enables Afghan producers to increase their operations in border regions. This is actually quite a very simple but clever plan, right? Of course, you set up all of your supplies next to where your operation is, right? In this case, they have the people moving to that border along Iran to figure out. So look along the border. If you want to look for drugs, look along the border of Iran to see who along that border was doing drugs, right? Wouldn't be too hard to figure out. So according to studies by international organizations, one of the routes for drug trafficking of Afghan origin to Europe, passing through Iran, also passes through Armenia and Georgia. It is for this reason, in some parts of Iran, the Iranian-Armenian border is also known as the Red Line, or the 1,000-year communication route. There are several known facts that demonstrate the existence of the above-mentioned Afghanistan-Iran Black Sea route. In July 2021, I found this saying, 368 kilos of heroin was seized in Ukraine as a result of the special international operation conducted jointly by the Georgian and Ukrainian interior ministries. As a result of the operational and investigative measures, it became known that a significant amount of heroin was planned to be smuggled from Iran to Ukraine via Armenia and Georgia, and from there to Central Europe. So that's an interesting route, right? So this route is going from Iran to Ukraine. That makes sense because who's visiting Ukraine and going on holiday there, right? Via Armenia and Georgia, and from there to Central Europe. Well, Central Europe means Brussels, right? Amsterdam, Netherlands. So, Armenia, Georgia. Okay, at various times, dozens of such attempts to smuggle a large quantities of drugs along this route have been detected. As a result of the special operation, seizures of drugs sent from Iran to Ukraine. It should be noted that at certain periods, there were attempts to use the territory of Azerbaijan to transport large quantities of drugs along the Iran Black Sea Europe route. So I think more specifically, we're probably now looking at the Iran Black Sea Europe route is what we're looking at. And it went on to say, for instance, in November 2019, border crossing officials at the Ostar checkpoint discovered and seized more than 933 kilos of heroin, a narcotic drug that was intended to be transported from Iran to Ukraine via transit through Azerbaijan. There's some really good people out there tracking all this stuff. I certainly hope you'll take advantage of all the links I've got posted below. This could be a novella, right? This whole thing about this drug thing. You could curl up for the next month and read this novel. For many years, Azerbaijan's occupied territories were also used as a transit route by some Iranian circles. The relevant Azerbaijan authorities have sufficient information about the establishment of drug plantations under Iranian control in the Gubati and Zagili districts, and the construction, here we get interesting, and also the construction of a secret underground tunnel for drug cartel activities between Zangilian and Aram, and that is spelled Zangilan. The clearing of Azerbaijan's borders with Iran from invaders during the Second Karabakh War resulted in the closure of the illegal route. However, the amount of heroin that was being attempted to be smuggled into the country and seized by the appropriate authorities doubled in other parts of the Azerbaijan border with Iran compared to previous routes. On September 20, 2021, Azerbaijan State Customs Committee, so they seized more than 527 kilos of heroin from an Iranian citizen who had transported a cargo of chemical substance and a drying additive from Iran to Latvia through the territory to Azerbaijan. They went on to say it is not possible to transport large quantities of drugs into the territories of Azerbaijan and Georgia outside of the control of the Customs and Border Services of Iran. So they're saying that Iran controls those border services in Azerbaijan and Georgia. Not a stretch to the imagination, right? These activities are under the direct control of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which is considered the power structure of the established religious regime in Iran. It is implausible to believe that those conducting military drills in the name of protecting border security are unaware of the massive drug trade raging along the nation's border. The transfer of the 130-kilometer section of the border with Azerbaijan, which has been a gray zone for many years, to the control of official Baku, has turned the Iranian-Armenian border into a sensitive issue for the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps. The existence, this is important, of Armenian, Georgia, Black Sea drug trafficking is of vital importance to Iran's relevant circles. Therefore, in line with the November 10th agreement to end the Karabakh conflict, the launch of the Zanguri Zangazur corridor in the unimpeding passage is seen by official Tehran as the red line. So they're marking their territory, basically how I'm reading this. It is no coincidence that the Border Guard Department of the Russian Federation Services, which ensures the security. Okay, so I'm going to be closing off here for a bit, but the Border Guard Department of the Russian Federal Security Services, they're the ones that ensure the security of the Iranian-Armenian border. And they installed new checkpoints. So let's just follow the path here. And it looks to me like we have their trade route for drugs, right? So it said It is for this reason that drug trafficking routes are considered under the name 1,000-year communication route, whatever that means. In some Iranian circles, the opening of the Zangwar Zangazur corridor is seen as the end of the drug trade and the loss of significant financial resources. In short, instead of supporting regional peace cooperation, Iran continues its nefarious practices of poisoning millions of people. France and Armenia, other patrons in the West, are aware of the ongoing drug trade across the Iranian-Armenian border. The French Senate and the Indian government are well aware that the weapons that both countries will sell to Armenia will be paid for by the proceeds from drug trafficking. Well. Like I said, there's a lot of good information out there, so just go looky. So what do we have here? This is an important one. It has to do with the UN. It's the UNODC country office in Iran. They held an annual event in Vienna on drug trafficking. It was the 67th session of the Commission on Narcotics Drugs. Vienna, 22 March 2024. We're talking just a few months ago. The UNODC country office in Iran organized a side event on understanding the changing illicit drug trafficking trends in West and Central Asia and developing evidence-informed, tailored, and proactive responses through capacity building interventions. The event was held on the sideline of the 67th session of the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, and that's what CND means. The purpose was to highlight Iran's effort on drug control at regional and international level. The event was supported by the Russian Federation and UNODC regional section on Europe, West, and Central Asia in Vienna. So I'm not really sure, but this event was opened by this person, the officer in charge of the regional section on Europe, West, and Central Asia. Some person, like his name was whatever. He reiterated the importance of mechanisms of cooperations at political level. So he further made reference to a rapid decrease in poppy cultivation and opium production in 2023, as well as methamphetamine manufacture in Afghanistan and drastic increase in seizures of methamphetamine in states in the region. They're looking at some sort of drug control cooperation is what they're looking at. Well, they're not really looking. This sounds good, right? It sounds good. Like, hey, this group's taking care of it. We can all sit back and relax. This is why their people always come into these things. They always are the ones who sponsor these organizations. Because then, unfortunately, many people then just sit back and think, yeah, somebody's already got it covered. When beneath this, I bet you won't hear anybody on the news talking about the facts that the United States actually is behind Hezbollah, right? So let me keep reading here, and then I need to take a break soon. So he made reference to rapid decrease in poppy cultivation and opium production in 2023, as well as methamphetamine manufacture in Afghanistan, and a drastic increase in seizures of methamphetamine in states in the region. He further emphasized on the need to adjust joint responses based on recent development and recognition of counter-narcotics activities as a shared responsibility. Well, this sounds great, doesn't it? The presentation also illustrated a comparison of seizures made in Iran with the seizures of neighboring countries, showing that despite significant decrease in opiate seizures in Iran since 2022. Surprisingly, Iran still accounts for having the highest amount of seizures of opiates compared to its neighboring countries as well as the rest of the world. He further introduced UN, ODC, and Iran joint cooperation in the field of supply reduction, demand reduction, as well as regional level. This all stuff is sounding good, right? The UN ODC country office, they're actually located in Iran. Just pay attention to this. Excuse me. So this group, the UN group, they've been present in the Islamic Republic of Iran since 1999. Gee, funny that all this stuff's going on, right? When was 9/11? 2001? I guess they got set up just in time. They consider Iran as one of the strategic partners for drug control and crime prevention in the industry, and has been supporting the Islamic Republic of Iran by providing technical assistance and training for years, ever since its establishment. So this is interesting too. This other one, the Commission on Narcotic Drugs, that was the one called CND. That was established by the Economic and Social Council, this resolution, in 1946 to assist in supervising the application of international drug control treaties. In 1991, the General Assembly expanded the mandate of the CND to function as a governing body of the UN ODC. The CND's agenda has two distinct segments: a normative segment for discharging treaty-based and normative functions, and an operational segment for exercising the role as a governing body of the UN ODC. Well, this is inspiring to know that they now have an assembly to look over this stuff, right? Well, meanwhile, while everybody's running drugs in every corner of the world, they got their assembly together, so that's encouraging. And they claim, I read this report from, let me see here, June 22, 2024. Iran and Afghanistan agreed to collaborate on drug trafficking issues by sharing information. Well, yeah, I bet they did. Exchanging experiences, offering educational resources. So this, I guess, they said this during a joint meeting in Kabul just last Monday. The deputy head of Iran's anti-narcotic headquarters has revealed a new agreement between Iran and Afghanistan aimed at strengthening their fight against narcotics and drug trafficking. Sharing reports the Tehran Times said on Thursday, so just literally in the last couple of weeks, right? In a meeting with members of Taliban interim government in Kabul, Mohammad Zarel discussed strategies for tackling drug issues, including prevention, reducing demand, and addiction treatment. It's hard for my brain to process that this meeting only took place a couple of weeks ago. They really like to get on these things, don't they? What happens is things are starting to run out of control. So now what you want to do is you want to move into the appearance stage, right? And that appearance stage means you do things like you come up with these meetings and strategies. Because when people start to question you moving forward, oh, wait, you don't get what's going on. We've acknowledged that was all an issue. So we've set up this committee to figure this stuff all out. This is how it just works. So the exchange of information regarding the fight against drug trafficking, the transfer of experience. Afghan officials have also requested these measures, Zairi said. Zairi pointed out that drug-related problems are not restricted to one region, underscoring the need for a regional and collaborative approach to information sharing to tackle the crisis effectively. And another major thing that I'd like to add into this little conversation today is this. These countries are now loaded, and I mean loaded with drug addicts. So, and those drug addicts may have come from better homes, right? More middle class versus totally impoverished homes, right? So part of this deal to say, yeah, we got a problem, a lot of drug addicts, right? If they're seeking to do something, there is a distinct reason. And my guess is these middle class people with the money and a little bit better access are speaking out because drugs are so rampant. I mean, I'm talking way rampant. Well, you oppress people for a whole bunch of years. What exactly is the expected result? But massive drug problems, right? So, both countries have pledged to improve conditions to utilize their informal resources to better combat and dismantle drug trafficking operations, according to the Iranian anti-narcotics official. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Interior of the Islamic Emirate stated that while no official agreement with Iran has been established, they had previously committed to preventing all forms of drug cultivation, production, and trafficking originating from Afghanistan. Well, that's good to know, right? Way to get on top of the subject. So, in late June, on the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking, an Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson announced that Iran is a leading force in the global. God, I don't know. Hold on a second. Some of this stuff is hard to read without choking. So, just in June, and we're right now in September, on the International Day Against Drug Abuse and Illicit Trafficking, the Iranian Foreign Ministry spokesperson announced that Iran is a leading force in the global fight against drug traffickers and those involved in the drug trade, underscoring its dedication to tackling this global issue. So, yeah, that's interesting, huh? That's talk about hiding in plain sight, right? That certainly answers the question for why are all those U.S. military bases surrounding Iran, because they're consolidating operations, keep everything close to the border, right? So there's a couple issues. It may have been the case. Let me talk a little bit about this Russian spy and Syria's chemical. I think what happened was that they always want to blame things on the Russians, right? So there was a Russian spy that was supposedly killed with polonium. And then I was reading along about him, and yeah, it makes sense. They were saying all the things. I'll tell you in a minute all the things they said he did. So they have this Russian spy dude, and they're like, yeah, he did this against Putin. He talked out against Putin. He did this, he did that. And oh, by the way, they killed him in the UK with his polonium. And then so I'm thinking, well, this stuff starts to make some sense, right? So then I keep reading, and then somebody said, they're hiding the fact that that wasn't him that was really killed. So I thought, wow, this is right up my territory, right? So I don't think even that guy, and I'll give you his name in a minute here, that supposedly got killed in the UK they laced it in his teeth. I don't think that was really the guy, because he probably just pulled out of the operations, right? Did he say all those things about Putin? Yeah, probably. People say a lot of things. These people are evil psychopaths. They go against each other. They're always blabbing about each other. Well, most of the shows on social media are these people talking about each other, right? They have whole channels of them spying on each other and talking about each other. So I think what's happening is that there really were no chemical attacks in Syria, but they want to blame these things always on the Russians, right? So I think the Russian guy supposedly being poisoned in the UK with the polonium, which I'll get to what that means in a bit here. And then the person that investigated that was none other than Richard Steele. I think his name was Richard, the guy that did the whole Russiagate thing, the M16 guy, he came up with all these other dodgy deals. So I think part of these chemical things might be because they want to paint the picture that here is the number one guiding principle of any good psychopath. The very first thing they do is they paint the other guy as doing exactly what they're doing, because that absolves them from question. Because then the other guy may just react like, wait a minute, why are you saying this about me? You're really talking about yourself. And then they take the next clever approach and they say, hey, did you notice how worked up they got over that? All I did was mention this. And look, they got so worked up. Maybe they are guilty. Maybe I am right. See how it works? So before you know it, you are now the guilty party in this scenario, right? And that's exactly the whole business model of how psychopaths work. They immediately put their whole crime on you. I've talked about this endlessly. They're always talking about things like when they talk about psychopaths with Robert Hare, the leading, they always make statements like, well, we're all kind of psychopaths. No, we are not. They always want to drag us in with their language. So, yeah, so anyways, that's what I think this whole chemical weapon deal is, right? Because you paint enough strange pictures in enough other corners, and pretty soon nobody's thinking it's you. So, because let me talk a little bit about the chemical in Syria, because they also use those things to keep information out of regions and to keep people isolated, right? So let's talk first about this guy, the spy. His name was Alexander Litvinenko. I'm sure you probably remember if I could pronounce it right. Alexander Litvinenko. Litvinenko. So they said how ex-spy was killed on Putin's orders and why no one is facing justice. So they wanted to peg this on Putin. An inquiry has found Mr. Litvinenko was killed by polonium poisoning in 2006 after antagonizing the Russian president after fleeing Russia to become a British citizen. So this polonium stuff, I'll have that here in a minute. This is going to be just a whole data dump on all of this stuff, because this new thing that's going to be coming up that you're going to be hearing a lot of is this new project that just broke ground up in Wyoming just in the last couple of months. Because at the end, I'll explore more about what Bill Gates is up to with his nuclear power ideas. They basically what they're doing is this. Warren Buffett was heavily into the coal business. And they found this place in Wyoming, and they're going to be closing down that coal plant. See, isn't that convenient, right? And so they're going to close down this coal plant. It's a small town, well, a couple thousand people. And just so happens that they're going to start trying to convert coal plants into nuclear plants. Yeah. And so it just so happened. So they go to this town and they say, hey, we got an opportunity for you, jobs. Nobody's going to mention these jobs are going to end up being deadly, but I digress. So what they're doing is that, so it's kind of interesting that Buffett, who was really big into the coal business, this is their first conversion of this coal mine, and it's called the Black Thunder Mine in Wyoming. It's the biggest coal mine in the country. So what does that mean? Well, I would suspect that probably I would not want to live in that area. Okay, so I'll just keep moving along here. So, because things are getting messy with some of this stuff, because now remember, they're building these nuclear places, right? But the problem is that the enriched uranium they use is imported from Russia. See how this could get kind of tricky? So they claim right now, and I'm giving you some of this information just so that when you read these things, you'll know, because they say on one hand, well, the U.S. has stopped buying Russian uranium. But what they did was they curved out this clause so the U.S. could continue buying from Russia, right? I first became suspect of the U.S. and Russia thing years ago because I was really scratching my head over this uranium deal. And that was way before I got into how deadly this whole thing is, because why would you sell uranium if you're supposedly your enemies with this person? It makes no sense, right? So they say the U.S. and Europe have largely stopped buying Russian fossil fuels as punishment for the Ukraine invasion. But roughly a third of enriched uranium used in the United States is now imported from Russia, the world's cheapest producer. And I could only imagine what those uranium mines in Russia are like. Now, why are they importing from Russia when the United States has a lot of uranium on its own? Well, good question. Well, the United States, and somebody needs to really dig into this, that the U.S. has been, in fact, sneaking around and doing uranium mine things, but they're doing them on, of course, Indian reservations. So I don't have any of the details about it. Just check it out, because the reason they would buy from Russia, because A, it's cheaper, right? And these are thugs, so they want cheap stuff. But the reason they would buy from Russia and not just open up the mines here and mine it, because it would just get too crazy for them, right? Hopefully people would just go out crazy and protest. But who protests over what's going on in Indian reservations, right? So I really need to take a break here. So I'm going to put a pause on this for right now.
The modern Middle East is a region troubled by war, terrorism, weak and failed states, and civil unrest. But how did it get this way? The map of today's Middle East was mostly drawn after the First World War, the war that planted many of the seeds of conflict that still plague Israel, Palestine, Iraq, Syria, and even Iran today. When the First World War began in 1914, the map of the Middle East looked much different than it does today. Most of the region was part of the Ottoman Empire and had been for centuries. Britain controlled Egypt and some strategic points in the Gulf, and a weak Persian state was informally under the influence of Britain in the south and the Russian Empire in the north. After the war ended in 1918, the Ottoman Empire disappeared and a host of new states replaced it. States whose borders were decided in far-off capitals and whose people were caught up in the chaos and uncertainty of an unstable new order influenced by ideas like nationalism, self-determination, and Zionism. For some, the new order held out hope for a better future, but for others, only fear. Even before 1914, the Middle East was a vital strategic region. Germany built the Berlin to Baghdad railway to extend its influence, Russia wanted Constantinople and saw itself as the protector of the Ottoman Empire's Orthodox Christians, France felt the same way about Middle Eastern Catholics, and Britain was concerned about the safety of the Suez Canal route to British India. Ottoman fear of the Russians, British and French is part of the reason the empire joined Germany and the Central Powers when the First World War began. For the next 4 years, fighting raged in Anatolia, Mesopotamia, the Sinai, and Palestine, alongside widespread famine and the Armenian genocide. As the war dragged on, both the Central Powers and the Allies tried to undermine each other's empires. The Germans and Ottomans appealed to Muslims under French, British, and Russian rule, while the Allies appealed to minority Christians and Arab nationalists living under the Ottomans. The great powers also struck secret deals with each other to divide the spoils of war in case they won. All these deals had one thing in mind: winning the war as soon as possible and benefiting from that victory. The contradictions and conflicts of wartime agreements could be sorted out later, or so they thought. One of these wartime deals was between the British Empire and the powerful Hashemite family of the Hejaz region, part of today's Saudi Arabia, but then part of the Ottoman Empire. The Hashemites were led by the Sharif of Mecca, Hussein ibn Ali al-Hashimi, who agreed to lead Arab tribes loyal to him in a revolt against the Ottomans. In exchange, the British promised that the Hashemites would rule a future independent Arab kingdom, but the deal was vague about borders. Hussein hoped that if the British won, his family could lay claim to new territories and power, and the way to legitimize this quest was through Arab nationalism. The Hashemites claimed that they represented the desire of Ottoman Arabs for freedom and their own national state, ideas that some Arab intellectuals and nationalist societies had indeed been calling for, though not necessarily under the Hashemites. This worked for the British, who positioned themselves as liberators. Many noble Arabs have perished in the cause of Arab freedom at the hands of those alien rulers, the Turks, who oppressed them. These noble Arabs shall not have suffered in vain. So from 1916 to 1918, the Hashemites led the Arab revolt against the Ottomans, with British assistance via T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. There is some debate about the military effectiveness of the uprising, but politically, it set high expectations for the peace, expectations that would be disappointed. The British knew their deal with Hussein violated a 1914 agreement with the French and Russians, which stated that any post-war land settlements would involve all the Allies. They also knew that the French had their own interests in the Middle East and might not be too keen on Arab independence. In late 1915, French diplomat François-Georges Picot made France's case clear. France would never consent to offer independence to the Arabs, though at the beginning of the war she might have done so. It was unthinkable that the French people would acquiesce in the placing of Christians of the Lebanon under a Mohammedan ruler. So Picot met with British diplomat Mark Sykes, which resulted in the secret Sykes-Picot Agreement of May 1916. Once the Ottomans were beaten, each ally would get its own sphere of direct and indirect influence in the Arab provinces and part of Anatolia, the French in the north and west, and the British in the southwest and south. Palestine was to be administered internationally, and earlier agreements gave other areas to Russia and Italy. Any future Arab kingdom would be under French and British influence. But there were doubters, like British Brigadier General George MacDonough. It seems to me that we are rather in the position of the hunters who divided up the skin of the bear before they'd killed it. I therefore think that any discussion at the present time of how we are going to cut up the Turkish Empire is chiefly of academic interest. So the British had promised the Hashemites an Arab kingdom, and the British and French had then divided up the same region between themselves. Palestine was the exception. There, the British made another controversial deal to help their war effort. The Zionist movement had existed since the 19th century and promoted the idea of a Jewish state. Zionist thinkers like Theodor Herzl considered several possible locations, but most settled on Palestine, which was the ancient homeland of the Jews and still home to a Jewish minority. Even before the war, Zionist Jews had been moving to Palestine, which created tensions with the Arab majority. We are a nation threatened with disappearance by the Zionist tide in this Palestinian land, a nation which is threatened in its very being with expulsion from its homeland. In 1917, the Allies were still struggling to win the war, and Russia dropped out after the revolution. At the same time, some in the British government, like David Lloyd George and Arthur Balfour, were sympathetic to the Zionist idea, an idea lobbied for by prominent British Zionists like Chaim Weizmann. London hoped that by supporting Zionism, the Jewish diaspora around the world might rally to the British cause. Some British politicians like Lord Curzon and Edwin Montagu, who was Jewish but anti-Zionist, opposed the idea, but in November 1917, Balfour sent a telegram to the Zionist Federation of Great Britain. His Majesty's government view with favour the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people, and will use their best endeavours to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine, or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. This was a dramatic commitment, but a vague one, since it was not clear whether national home meant state, and what the situation of the non-Jewish majority would be in practice. So in order to win the war, the British had made a deal with the Hashemites for Arab independence, the British and French had made a deal to divide most of the Middle East, and the British promised to support Zionism. As if this wasn't complicated enough, in 1917 the United States joined the war, and the tangle of contradictions began to unravel. In January 1918, President Woodrow Wilson unveiled his 14 points for peace. Wilson's points included the concept of self-determination, that each people who identified as a nation ought to determine their own future. This seemed simple in principle, but it didn't match with the reality of mixed populations and mixed identities on the ground. There were Arab nationalists, but most Middle Easterners were still not familiar with the relatively new concept of national identity. They usually identified more with their religion, tribe, extended family, or home region. Yes, some tribes joined the Hashemite revolt, but most did not question Ottoman rule and remained loyal to the existing system, whether they were enthusiastic about it or not. Those who did feel a drive for national self-determination, be they Arabs, Zionists, Kurds, or others, now felt that there would be a state for them after the war. High expectations that would be very hard to meet. After successful British offensives in Palestine and Mesopotamia, the war finally ended with an Allied victory in November 1918, and a strange interlude began. The armistice had stopped the fighting, but it would take time to sort out the post-war order. British and French troops occupied the Ottoman Arab provinces and parts of Anatolia, the Americans brought humanitarian aid to feed the starving, and the politicians discussed the fate of Europe and the Middle East at the Paris Peace Conference. Delegations of nationalists made the trip to Paris to argue their case, though most would return without any concrete promises. Lebanese Christian patriarch Elias Hoaik was an exception when he lobbied the French government to take a clear role in Lebanon. All my efforts will be aimed at obtaining, in accordance with the Lebanese national will, the complete independence of my country with the help of France. The resulting peace treaty signed at Versailles in June 1919 not only formally ended the war between the Allies and Germany, it also created the League of Nations, an international organization to maintain peace. The League would play a key role in the fate of the Middle East, especially since the British, French, and Americans now began to argue over how to implement the wartime agreements. The British felt that since they'd done most of the fighting against the Ottomans, they deserved a bigger share of the spoils. The Americans opposed the secret wartime diplomacy and insisted that the League should oversee the gradual independence of Middle Eastern peoples via so-called mandates. This meant that a developed state would be responsible for advice and assistance until the new states could function on their own, in theory. In practice, it wasn't quite clear how the mandate would work, including to the Hashemite would-be rulers of a new Arab kingdom. What does the word mandate mean? We do not exactly know. I only wish to say that the nations in whose name I speak intend to remain free to choose the power whose advice they will ask. Their right to decide their fate in the future has been recognized in principle. Very well. But a secret agreement to dispose of these nations has been prepared, about which we have not been consulted. I ask the Assembly whether this state of things ought to exist or not. While the heated discussions were going on at the League, the US Congress changed its mind, and even though the League was President Wilson's idea, the US refused to sign the peace treaty or join the League when it officially came into being in January 1920. For the British and French, this was an opportunity. At the San Remo Conference in spring 1920, they formalized the military reality on the ground. France became the mandatory power for Syria and Lebanon, while Britain did the same for Mesopotamia, Transjordan, and Palestine. This allowed them to indirectly rule while not officially taking these regions on as imperial possessions. In the words of historian Michael Provence, the populations of the mandated territories thus assumed all the responsibilities and none of the benefits of national sovereignty. One question the conference did not resolve were the borders. They would have to wait until a peace treaty could be signed with the Ottomans, who still ruled, but in name only. The League did say France and Britain had to consider the wishes of the population, but British and French administrators mostly ignored local petitions. The American King Crane Commission's survey received conflicting results. Some people wanted democracy, some wanted a greater Syria, including Lebanon and Palestine, some wanted British oversight, some French and some American, and some wanted a Hashemite king. A majority did not want the mandates at all, and 99% were opposed to Zionist settlement in Palestine. After all the wartime deprivations and sufferings, the collapse of the Ottoman Empire, and a lack of a stable New World Order, it isn't surprising that there was widespread violence in the Middle East after the Great War ended. Egypt rose in a failed revolution against British rule in 1919, and there were clashes between religious and ethnic groups in Lebanon. There was a major war in Anatolia between the Turkish nationalist forces under Mustafa Kemal and allied, mostly Greek, troops, which resulted in the creation of the Turkish Republic and the formal dissolution of the Ottoman Empire. In Persia, the British wanted to counter Bolshevik Russian influence and secure access to oil, so they supported a coup by future Shah Reza Pahlavi, who took control of the country in 1921. But the violence that was the most intractable and arguably impacted the troubled future of the region most of all occurred in Palestine, Syria, and Iraq. In Palestine, the British Mandate incorporated the Balfour Declaration, and British authorities encouraged Jewish settlement. Some 35,000 Jewish settlers arrived between 1919 and 1923, hoping for a better life. International Jewish organizations often helped settlers buy land, some of which, but not all, was previously infertile. Some also declared their desire not just for a Jewish homeland, but a Jewish state, which stoked tensions with Palestinian Arabs, as did the British administration working closely with Zionist groups. Some British officials and Jews wanted to curb settlement, but when enthusiastic Zionist supporter Herbert Samuel became British High Commissioner in Palestine, British support for settlement became more explicit. The British and some Zionists argued that settlement would benefit Arabs through economic improvements, but most Arabs saw things differently. Writer Musa Kazim al-Husseini complained to Colonial Minister Winston Churchill in August 1921. Jewish settlers depreciate the value of land and property and at the same time manipulate a financial crisis. Can Europe then expect the Arabs to live and work with such a neighbor? In response, Churchill reiterated his support for Jewish settlement. Things turned deadly with Arabs rioting in Jerusalem and an organized firefight at Tel Hai in 1920, claiming the lives of a handful on both sides. Tensions fully boiled over in May 1921 in the town of Jaffa. A fight between rival Jewish socialist groups near a mosque spun out of control and led to deadly rioting between Jews and Arabs. Arabs killed 47 Jews, and the next day, Jewish groups and British police retaliated, killing 48 Arabs. A British commission mostly blamed the Arabs, but admitted that their grievances stemmed from, quote, political and economic consequences of settlement and perceived pro-Jewish bias of the British. Zionist Ze'ev Jabotinsky felt that the time had come to build a metaphorical wall around the settlers. Zionist colonization can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. French rule in Syria and Lebanon got off to a violent start as well. Hussein's son Faisal had led Arab forces into Syria in 1918 and announced his claim to the throne of a Syrian kingdom. But the French would not give up control, so French Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau and Faisal agreed that Syria would become a de facto state under the French mandate. Faisal's Arab nationalist allies of the Syrian National Congress, however, wanted full independence and control over Lebanon and Palestine. A nationalist society informed Faisal of their position. "We are ready to declare war on both England and France." Faisal's priority was becoming king, so he reluctantly agreed to cancel the deal with the French and was crowned King of Syria on March 7, 1920. France threatened to invade, so Faisal now accepted their terms, but his answer arrived late, so a French army invaded Syria anyway from its base in Lebanon, and defeated the ragtag Arab army at the Battle of Maysalun in July. Faisal fled to Mesopotamia, but Maysalun became a symbol for Arab nationalism and resistance to European imperialism, as Ali Alawi has written. It was a military disaster, but its name has gone down in Arab history as a synonym for heroism and hopeless courage against huge odds, as well as for treachery and betrayal. Faisal's position between the French and the nationalists and his own family's ambitions have caused lots of historical debate about whether he was a power-hungry opportunist, a sincere pan-Arab nationalist, or both. In Mesopotamia, the British were also struggling. Their military was stretched thin across the region, bureaucrats fought departmental turf wars, and politicians argued about how much independence Mesopotamia would have, and whether it would be 1, 2, or even 3 states in the future. One thing soon became clear: the population was divided. Some of the urban elite were not against British control, while the ex-Ottoman Officers Association and much of the tribal countryside was. In June 1920, a local Arab politician warned British Administrator Gertrude Bell. You said in your declaration that you would set up a native government drawing its authority from the initiative and free choice of the people concerned. Yet you proceed to draw up a scheme without consulting anyone. That same month, the Iraqi Revolt, also known as the Iraqi Revolution, began. From a local tribe resisting British troops imprisoning one of their own, the unrest spread across the Middle Euphrates region. Tribal forces besieged several British garrisons, captured Najaf and Karbala, and defeated multiple British relief columns. It took the British until November and 450 dead to put down the revolt, and the settlement included a vague promise of an independent Arab kingdom that had yet to be defined. The fighting, though, caused some in Britain to question the mandate. How much longer are valuable lives to be sacrificed in the vain endeavor to impose upon the Arab population an elaborate and expensive administration which they never asked for and do not want? The British defeated the Iraqi tribes, but they didn't understand them. Bureaucrats wrote reports that blamed the revolt on a conspiracy between Turkey and Faisal, a conspiracy between the Germans and the Turks, and possibly the Bolsheviks too, the machinations of the American Standard Oil Company, Pan-Islam, or the Jews. Tribal leader Sayyid Muhsin Abu Tabih was more pragmatic. The British hastened the revolt's timing by their ignorance about the proud personality of the Iraqi and the numerous political mistakes that they committed across the country. There is a historical debate about the Iraqi revolt or revolution as well. Some see it as a rebellion of different groups who were upset at British rule because it was foreign and heavy-handed. Others emphasize the role of former Ottoman officers who supported Faisal as future king. Still others consider it a national revolution that laid the foundation for a modern Iraqi identity and eventual independence. The shape of the modern Middle East became more clear by 1921, even though formal peace only came in 1923. At the Cairo conference, the powers agreed that Faisal would rule over the Kingdom of Iraq, his brother Abdullah would become king of Transjordan, and Britain would continue to support the Zionist project in Palestine. Though Britain would still have significant influence, the new kingdoms enjoyed more autonomy than the British had intended, thanks to the Iraqi revolt. Independence, though, would have to wait. The French soon divided Syria and Lebanon into 5 separate states, which they would rule for years to come. They also decided to create Greater Lebanon by attaching several Muslim districts to mostly Christian Mount Lebanon, creating an unfamiliar and volatile mix. And so the First World War had swept away the centuries of Ottoman rule and created a new Middle East. It was a region of fragile new states, supposedly on their way to independence thanks to the League of Nations, but in fact under British and French imperial control. There was violence between religious and ethnic communities, and there was violence against foreign domination. And in Palestine, there was the uncertainty of the Zionist project. Would it result in the creation of a Jewish state, or would it result in perpetual tensions in Palestine? Or perhaps both. The roots of the Middle East conflict were planted after the First World War, but it really escalated during the Cold War, where the superpowers got involved and several wars were fought in the region. In the background, Israel was pursuing the acquisition of nuclear weapons, much like the US and USSR had done during and after World War II. And while the nuclear arsenals expanded, the Soviet Union also pursued their vision of nuclear-powered communism by rapidly increasing the production of nuclear reactors. Whole cities were built to accommodate the new atomic elite that would help produce limitless energy. I bet you have the name of one of these cities, Pripyat. If you're interested to learn more about the Soviet nuclear program from its origins in World War II to the Chernobyl disaster and beyond, you can watch our new documentary series Red Atoms exclusively on Nebula. Nebula is a streaming service that we're building together with other creators and where we don't have to worry about the algorithm or advertising guidelines and where viewers directly support creators. If you go to nebula.tv/The Great War, you can get 40% off an annual subscription. For just $30 a year, you can watch Red Atoms or our other Nebula original series and much more. And that's not all. Apart from watching other creators' original documentaries like the Battle of Britain series from Real Engineering, your Nebula subscription also includes classes, where you can learn useful skills directly from Nebula creators. In our newest class, I take you through the entire production process of a real-time history video and give you a glimpse behind the scenes of what it takes to produce a great history documentary. And of course, on Nebula you can also watch all our videos ad-free and usually earlier than on YouTube. And if you really want to support us and the idea behind Nebula, this December you can get the Nebula Lifetime membership. It allows us and Nebula to invest more into original documentaries that we couldn't produce on YouTube, to further improve Nebula and bring it to even more platforms, plus it supports us at Real-Time History directly. That's nebula.tv/The Great War. As usual, you can find all the sources for this episode in the video description. If you're watching this video on Patreon or Nebula, thank you so much for your support. I'm Jesse Alexander, and this is a production of Real-Time History, the only history channel that knows that it all goes back to the First World War.
History of Iran be like Aryan Chads move into the Iranian plateau. They vibe. Get wiped by Mesopotamians. New guys move in. They get taxed by the Mesopotamians. Beat the out of them with friends. Establishes a kingdom. King's grandson beats him up and conquers the kingdom. Leaves behind the largest superpower on earth. Later they get conquered by a bisexual Macedonian man. He dies from something. Iran is ruled by Greeks. They spend centuries fighting other Greeks. A couple of horse war conquer the whole empire. Spend centuries fighting Romans over Armenia. A rebellion grows out of control and conquers the empire. Ultra-based rulers Zoroastrian pilled. Spend centuries fighting Romans over Armenia. Last so long that both empires are exhausted. Latest Shah is asked by an Arab dude named Muhammad to convert to Islam. ROFL. Arabs steamroll the armies of Byzantium and Ctesiphon. Spend the next centuries being the nerds of the Islamic Caliphate. Rulers adopt most of the culture and government of the land. Caliphate gets so weak it sparks an Iranian renaissance. Ends after Turks decide they want to rule. Spend the next centuries being the nerds of the Turkish empires. Rulers adopt most of the land's culture. Turks kill a Mongol emissary. Genghis Khan ends up committing a lot of war crimes. The empire breaks up soon after his death, but Mongols continue to rule Iran. Rulers adopt most of the land's culture. Empire breaks apart into multiple Turco-Mongol kingdoms. A Turkish, Kurdish, Caucasian teenager then unifies most of Iran. Kicks out all other religions except Shia Islam. Attempts to unite all the Turks. Fails, decides to become Persian instead. Spends centuries fighting Ottomans over Armenia. After a golden age and opium they are conquered by Afghans. A sheep stealer takes advantage of the situation. Creates his own empire. Taxes the out of Iran. Later killed by his own troops and malaria. The empire breaks apart into Iranian kingdoms. One of them does really well. A eunuch decides he can do better. Creates his own dynasty. Is so shit Armenia and friends are lost to Iran forever. Sells off most of Iran's resources. Land is divided between foreign powers. Becomes a battleground during World War I. A Corsair commander takes advantage of the situation. Creates his own dynasty. Attempts to modernize Iran and push back outside influence. Russia and Britain double penetrate Iran soon during World War II. Replace Shah with his son. Becomes best friends with the West. The Prime Minister wants to nationalize oil. Scares the West who fail to get rid of him. They try again with the Shah and succeed. Tsar teaches him how to deal with future revolts. Continues father's modernization and reforms. Hosts parties that bankrupt the nation. People disagree and revolt. Puts down rebellions with lethal force. Escalates until a revolution is started to overthrow the Shah. He gets the heck out of there. Ayatollah takes advantage of the situation. Iran is now an Islamic republic. It's the most convoluted government ever devised. Starts purging Shah supporters and kidnaps Americans. Iraq sees a chaos and invades Iran. MFW war ends up resembling World War I. Each side claims victory ending the war. Iran gets ass blasted by sanctions. Mullahs so corrupt they squander most of the resources. End up in Cold War with us. Saudi Arabia and Israel deal with protests because you're more authoritarian than the Shah.
Iran. Nigga, I can't even walk.
Thanks for the money, dummy.
Conquering a country normally takes a while, especially if that country is covered in mountains and deserts. But during World War II, when Britain and the Soviet Union decided to conduct a joint invasion of Iran, the country fell in only 6 days. Which raises the question, why? Why did Iran fall so quickly? So in 1941, German leaders decided that they'd like to take a trip to the Urals and began the invasion of the Soviet Union. 4 seconds after this, Britain and the USSR became allies. And making sure that the USSR had the supplies necessary to fight Germany became of paramount importance. One way of doing this was via the Northern Sea route here, but that was fraught with risk. The other way was going via Vladivostok, but that was too far, and so another option was needed. And that option was Iran, which also had lots of oil as a bonus. However, much to the annoyance of the British, the Shah of Iran saw his country as sovereign and didn't want to upset the Germans, whom he got along with. As such, the British and the Soviets decided to invade. While supplying the USSR was the primary objective of the invasion, stopping Iran from selling oil to Germany and potentially threatening British India were also important reasons. For Iran, things were pretty bleak to begin with. The USSR had a massive land border to the north and British troops were waiting to the east and the west. But even with this, 6 days is a very short time to conquer such a mountainous large country. So how did the Allies do it? Well, reason number one was that the Allies launched a surprise attack. Unlike most conflicts of the time, there was no formal declaration of war or ultimatum before that. Just that one day, British and Soviet troops had crossed into the country and Tehran was being bombed. Which meant that the Iranians weren't able to mount a defence because the Allies had taken infrastructure within their first few hours. The second reason was that the Iranian army wasn't very capable. Whilst they were on the defensive and had a numerical advantage, the point of the army was to shoot the Shah's internal opponents, not hold off a mixed arms invasion on multiple fronts by two great powers. And reason number three why Iran fell so quickly was that nobody really liked the Shah very much. Many Iranians had been at the shooty end of the Shah's regime, and ethnic minorities there had been having a pretty bad time. And so when the Shah was threatened, very few really cared. Furthermore, whilst Iranian generals knew that winning conventionally would be impossible, they did want to resort to guerrilla tactics to make occupying Iran too costly. The Shah, however, felt that this would cost too many lives and much more importantly would ruin all of the nice new roads that he built during his reign. And as such, he called for a ceasefire after just 6 days. The Shah had hoped that by giving up, the Allies would be much more generous towards him and his country, but fun fact, no. He was soon forced to abdicate in favour of his son, and Britain and the USSR occupied these parts of the country. The agreement was that they would stay until 6 months after Germany's defeat, but instead they stayed for about a year. In fact, the USSR was hard-pressed to leave at all. They were soon pressured by the USA into retreating, and after they'd left, Iran was once again a free nation. I hope you enjoyed this episode with a special thanks to my patrons, James Bizanet, Kelly Moneymaker, Sky Chappelle, Kartoitska, Anthony Beckett, Rod D. Martin, Yuduan Wang, Marcus Arsner, YN Hockey, Alex Schwinn, AF Firefly, Captain Psydog, Spencer Lightfoot, Gustav Swan, The McWhopper, Shuwenin, Marvin Cassow, Winston Kaywood, Spinning 3 Plates, Andy McGeehee, Kamoon Yoon, Calling Dr. Howard, Dr. Fine, Dr. Howard, Todd Short, Copper Tone, Maggie Patskowski, Words About Books Podcast, Jim Stromberg, Miss Izet, and Charles the First.
Okay, I just played a clip about the Middle East. You know how they broke it up and gave everybody the same looking flag? That region, and I'm going to be closing off this file, and I will pick this up again more likely tomorrow. So that region around the Ottoman Empire, just as a reminder to kind of keep this particular discussion kind of intact, is that I first found during the Ottoman Empire this report of white slave women being sold during the Ottoman Empire. Well, that story led me all the way up through Russia and back down, and I believe a lot of that became part of the orphan train kids, because what happened basically, just as a quick overview, and I don't know, the shows are going to be in my list of shows. I'm not going to be able to look for them and tell you what they are for right now. But anyway, so when I covered it at the time, I started off in the Ottoman Empire, where that show just kind of picked up and then went off into the Middle East. And what I had been talking about, and my theory at the time was this, that so because I found these white slave women, I started looking, and there was this big deal in Russia with the Crusaders, and they were white, okay? And remember, we're talking, everybody else was brown up until this point. So that's how they populated the white deal. So find all these Crusaders in Russia, and then they were kind of living their life out farming and doing whatever. And then they got run out of Russia. Big deal. They were slaughtered. And as they were run out of Russia, they were given an opportunity to go on boats over to the Ottoman Empire. And I mean, it was just a huge slaughter. I'm not going to go into it all right now. So all these Circassians are shoved off. And my theory at the time, and it still is my theory now, is that they were demanded that they leave Russia. As a matter of fact, the place where they did the slaughter became covered up in cement. It's a big deal. But anyway, so my theory is this: they're offered a passage out of there, right? Because their people were just getting wiped out. And I feel like you're getting wiped out, right? So you're rushing to the boat, got your whole family there. And when you get to that boat, I feel like it was highly likely that at that stage they said, hey, adults over here, kids over there, and nobody would have been able to have stopped them at that stage because they're right there on the dock. They have nowhere to go. Their whole society has been wiped out in Russia through that huge thing. And it's a very interesting story. I suggest you take a look at it. But anyway, so I think at that point, because during that show, I matched up the years and stuff. And I think at that point, the people were just literally shoved in two directions, right? Nobody had any choice. The boats were there. You go here, you go there. And I believe that is where a good portion of those orphan train kids came in. Because they were all stolen pretty much from what I've been able to tell. I've been following those orphan train kids for years now. And they were pretty much all stolen. And I believe a lot of them got stolen at that juncture, which makes it more interesting because they obviously would not have any skills toward English language. So, yeah, steal a bunch of kids that don't even speak English, and there you go, right? So, sadly, that is what happened with those orphan train children. So, I'm going to be closing this off for now because the next part of this is going to be this nuclear thing. And I found a lot of information because, for example, they're saying one thing and then I found, direct proof of how it happens, like why they started that whole fossil fuel thing and all that. And I'll also have the information about Bill Gates, because what's happened, Bill Gates, this is just my idea, is that they've teamed up. They can go and do these coal plants, pick them up cheap, get a town of desperate people who are all looking for jobs, right? And so I really want to take the time to explain that to you. And this is what got me started on Bill Gates, because he said, I was watching all these Bill Gates interviews and about this particular thing, not just about everything. And he said, this is the tipping point. He said he has concerns over militaries getting their hands on it, meaning the nuclear. That is, hold that thought. The whole idea, this isn't any military that's going to take this over. This is being to supply this homeland security thing to put plutonium in all of our smart meters to be radiating full-time into our homes. So yeah, it sounds good when they say, well, Bill Gates is saying he's concerned over the military getting their hands on this stuff. We should worry about who has their hands on it right now. So be safe out there, and I'll be back likely tomorrow, because all this radiation stuff that I'll be going into next, they're literally irradiating most everything, okay? And what the shift is going to be is they're going to start to talk about things are pasteurized, and that will lead me into my next group of thoughts about pasteurized milk and D. Because in order to get everybody to accept what they called vitamin D in milk, mandatory, right? Always look at what's mandatory. They made it look not mandatory, which it really didn't come across as mandatory. They were just like, well, we're going to add this vitamin D to your milk, right? And, who's going to argue about vitamin D in milk? Because people think, well, vitamin D, that's the sun, right? Well, here's the trick. Vitamin D isn't even close to being a vitamin. It is a highly, and I mean highly, highly necessary hormone. And that's why all these jokers on social media are all just saying, yeah, I can take vitamin D and K2 and yeah, fix it all. I didn't find anybody but one of them actually say that vitamin D is in fact a hormone. It's like, rah, rah, okay, let's take it. And get this, they've only been trying to understand what they call vitamin D in the last 10 years. So they have essentially been putting what they call vitamin D into milk and all this stuff, which I believe is where this hormone thing is coming from. But feeling too tired to go into all that today. But they've been recklessly, and I'll show you the whole trail. They've been recklessly putting this D stuff into milk. And at certain points, I found that they would like all of a sudden just double the amount. Well, this is such a critical vitamin that it really, absolutely, people will feel a lot better if they know how to take it properly. So anyway, so I have to close off for now. So be safe out there and goodbye for now.